Welcome back to A Look in the Mirror. I am Ben, joined by Brian and Maggie to talk about season 7, episode 2 of Black Mirror, teNoire. And I thought this was a good episode. I think there's a lot to dive in here. Episode 1, we talked about how Maggie and I both love White Bears. This feels like White Bear if it had a happy-ish ending, or maybe like I know there's a USS Callister sequel later in the season. This kind of also felt like a little bit of a spiritual successor to the original USS Callister in some ways. But yeah, I guess Maggie, what was your initial kind of reaction to this episode?
I think Maria is a bad person and the bad guy won at the end. I don't think this is a happy ending at all. I truly don't think that. I mean, not saying Verity
Bird.
was also a good person either, but I did not like Maria, and I also don't think that, at the I don't think this is a happy ending episode either. I really like this episode as well because I think it had a darkness overriding it, with a dark ending at it. Not as sad as Common People, but definitely a dark ending.
Mhm. Yeah, Brian,
Yeah,
what
I
about you?
really I really liked it. I love the idea of the Mandela effect. Though I don't believe in the Mandela effect. I do love the idea that people are so like convinced that it is a real thing. And of course they went with the classic like Berenstein versus Berenstein bears with the Barneys versus Bernies here in this. I loved that they really committed to it before you knew what was happening. Where at the beginning of the episode, the hat does say Barneys, and then like later it says Bernies. That's very fun. It felt very much like the most magical episode of Black Mirror in a little bit, where it's like, okay, it's heavy science fiction where it's like, okay, she can jump universes with her supercomputer that she's built in her mansion. Um, and it felt a little bit like, I'm a really big fan of like Buffy and Angel. It felt like an episode that would have been like in one of those where it's like this person has made, this thing that allows them to jump universes at will. But I thought it was fun nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, talking about suspension of disbelief, and we were talking about Common People and how you didn't really have to do that in that episode. I definitely found myself having to suspend my disbelief with the technology in this episode. But I mean, look, yeah, even like last season in Black Mirror, like season 6, we had both Maisie Day and was it Demon 73 or whatever it's called,
79, Demon
79.
79.
And both of those were way more like fantasy-esque than like the normal kind of sci-fi-esque that Black Mirror is. So as far as like suspension of disbelief, this definitely didn't hit the 10 for me, but it was like up there for like a 7 or an 8, where I was like, yeah, this doesn't really make a ton of sense, but like I'll go with the setup for the for the idea of like at least buying into the premise of the story. Um,
Honestly, I kind of think, right now media, it's very popular. Alternate realities is huge, right? Every other movie or show is doing something referencing to it. And I thought that I was curious to see if Black Mirror would honestly go into that at all, go into this season, knowing that it is such a big thing. And I think Black Mirror, this is probably the most realistic representation of an alternate reality scenario, The subtlety of if you have infinite amount of universes, there is gonna be universes where just like the difference between Barneys and Bernies is would exist, and I don't, when we look at Marvel, we look at so Spider-Verse, they go for these completely different universes that the characters is diving into. And I've always personally been more curious of like the subtle changes in the universe and these subtle things. And so for Black Mirror in this to, reference that, I do think this is a more realistic version. Now, obviously, the little button remote technology thing, sure, that's our suspended disbelief. But I I appreciate Black Mirror's interpretation of this and the subtlety in this, and then the mind craziness that can relate or be the result of this. So, I truly appreciate. I really like this episode a lot.
Yeah. I guess so. Talking at a very high level, Maggie said at the start that she thought that Maria was the villain. I mean,
Yeah.
I personally like. I mean, look, it's Black Mirror. Like staying strictly this person's the hero, this person's the villain. It's not often the case. Like even talking about like past episodes, even like USS Callister, which is what I kind of compared this to a little bit in terms of like antisocial geek kind of derives this evil reality in order to play out revenge fantasies. It's kind of very similar vibe as to what we got with Verity here. For me, I would say like, yeah, being a mean girl in high school, starting a horrible rumor and like, causing somebody lifelong trauma, that's pretty bad. But like, I would say turning yourself into a demigod in order to like drive people into like suicide, and I would say it's like worse. I would say if we're putting them on a spectrum. Like, obviously, I don't think that Maria is like a great person, but like, I think that for me, the villain of this episode is Verity.
But I think Verity she didn't start like that. It's revealed that she has lived who knows how many lives at that point. She has gone through and been Empress Universe. She was on cover of Vogue. She was an astronaut at some point. She's had like all of these different lifetime experiences, and at the end, it was she admitted that there was still this naggingness of the original rumor created by Maria. And obviously children are terrible. That's a big thing that we're seeing, that kids are just awful. They create these rumors. But the comparison of like some of these rumors becomes almost like a reality in of itself. That's what
Mhm.
happened to Verity. I really love that juxtaposition of how rumors can become an entity of their own, become real. And
Yes.
this parallelism of these multiple realities that Verity was able to crack into and live. Um, you know, Maybe to save Maria as a villain, it was extreme, like podcast, here we go.
Mhm.
Throw that buzzword out there. But I throughout this episodes, we are seeing moments. There's not a moment where Maria really has likable qualities. Even like from the opening shot with her boyfriend or husband, I'm not sure what it was, asking for this trip, and she's kind of blowing him off. She corrects him for like a simple little thing. He says like the wrong city or wrong country they're going to. She's not good at her job. Everyone doesn't like her food. There's qualities of Maria that we see throughout the episode that she's not a likable person. And at the end, even when she goes to Verity, she's like, why don't you just be in charge of everything? We know Maria's a control freak too,
Mhm.
And so I think there's a lot more under the surface of the relationship between these two. But I agree, maybe Maria Verity should also like kill people too.
Yeah,
That's
no, look, I'm not saying I stand by. No, Maria is like they're not. Maria's not the hero, right? Like Maria is also a bad person. I'm just saying on the scale of bad people, right? If you put a gun to my head, and threaten to blow my brains out, like what happened to Verity at the end of the episode, like and tell me which one is like, make me pick which one is worse. I'm saying Verity is worse. um, Brian, what are your thoughts? I guess.
Yeah, well, I do like that. Like Maria, one of her character traits is like always being right
Mhm.
about little things, like Maggie pointed out. And then so this is like the worst torture that could ever happen to somebody like that. Um, yeah, I mean they're both bad people for sure. I wish they had gone into it a little bit more. Like, could she not have made a universe where the rumor was never spread, or
Yeah.
is the rumor being spread the point in time that motivates her to create a supercomputer in order
Mhm.
to create
Mhm.
alternate universes? I'm guessing that is the case, that like without this rumor, she never would have been motivated to create a computer that allows her to do anything and always be right and create multiple universes, or else she would have just easily been like, okay, well, that didn't ever happen, actually.
Yeah, I think it's either that or like because she's the one in control, she still keeps all of her memories and knowledge regardless.
Right.
So like even though she's like transporting herself or like, she's like transmuting her corporeal form or whatever she said into other parallel realities, she still is keeping the knowledge of all of the previous ones that she had already experienced. So like maybe it's that, and like, but yeah, I agree. Like unless there is some kind of like time travel catch-22 situation where the trauma is a requirement for the thing that cures the trauma to have existed in the first place, and it can't happen any other way. Yeah, it doesn't make a ton of sense for me, and that's like also one of the reasons why like I would say that Verity is like pretty clearly in the wrong here. Like you can experience trauma and then be a bad person as a result of that trauma, right? Like if you've created this incredible machine and the things you want to do with it are completely selfish and like self-serving, that to me would be an indication that you are probably not a good person, even if bad things have happened to you.
But Maria, the second she gets her hands on it, she does the same thing.
Exactly.
Yes.
She's like, I'm the emperor. She like, at first she's like immediately addressing the problems at hand.
Mm-hmm.
And then like once everything's gone, she's like, oh, actually, I'm the empress of the universe now.
Mm-hmm.
I think
that's crazy.
I think there's a case too of like a little bit of an unreliable narrator in the terms of we're following this from Maria's, perspective. And through Maria, we assume that Verity was, kind of like her in the sense of like, why wouldn't you just become Empress of the Universe first thing? Like why wouldn't you just want that always? And obviously we see the evidence that Verity had done that, but we don't see signs that maybe Verity had gone and looked into more humane realities. I'm curious. I want to go back at some point and look at that shelf of her past lives. Because if I'm remembering correctly, there was stuff about research, and I think there were some different realities that maybe would show more signs of Verity, a more humane side of Verity. And in the end, she still has that nagging, like it's all about Maria, and that started that rumor thing. Whereas Maria, her first instinct is not to shift to a reality where her classmate is alive. It's not shifting to a reality where, everything just goes back to normal as it was and she's correct. Her first instinct is to become Empress of the Universe, and that control that she needs, again. And so we think, because we see through Maria's perspective, that's what we should all want. And I don't want that. I think there's a bit of an unreliable narration in terms of how bad Verity is. We don't know. We just don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we do see Verity like basically bragging about driving Natalie to suicide.
Yeah, I mean, true. You're right. Fair point.
Yeah. And like, no matter what reality she made, like maybe she made a reality where she cured cancer, that wasn't enough for her to be like cool with it. She's like, no, I really need to get revenge on my high school bullies.
I think she tried.
Yeah, no good people really in this, but I thought it was fun. What else I really liked the boyfriend's character. I thought he was fun and silly. Thought that actor did a good job in the role, having to deal with this and like kind of finding out the story. Like, Maria's like, oh yeah, she's just like someone who's like a nerd. I didn't really know her. And like over the course of the episode being like, yeah, actually, like I did some fucked up shit in high school to her.
Yeah,
I think that's more evidence of her unreliable narration, but I digress.
Yeah.
No, I mean, absolutely. I think that we're intended to be more sympathetic towards Maria because she's like the point of view character for the episode. And we're like basically experiencing the gaslighting alongside her as Verity is doing this, because like we see her, we see the hat spelled the correct way at the start of the episode. We see her type the email the correct way, and then it gets changed. We see the scene in the kitchen with the almond milk, and like we had already previously had set up that she had a nut allergy. So like we're experiencing, we're as the audience almost kind of being gaslit alongside Maria, and so I think that probably plays a role in sympathizing more with her as a character. Whereas like maybe if the story was told a different way, then it would play out a different way.
It'd be really cool, impossible probably to do. But it'd be really cool if like Netflix could have like, made it so that when you rewound an episode, like it plays out however Verity said it played out. So then you're yourself like, wait, no, I swear I just watched this.
You like click to the beginning of the episode and it says Bernie's now. And you're like,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
exactly. That would have been like the next level of
I almost did. I almost like did
right.
go back and checked it, and I was like, no, let's just play it out. Like,
yeah, but after I watched, I checked. I was like, I swear it did say Barney's. Like, yeah, okay, it did. So like, but it would be very cool if somehow Netflix was able to like replace the episode as you're playing the episode, so that if anyone went back, it would gaslight you the same way Mario's being gaslit.
Yeah. No, that would, I mean, that's like, talk about, Bandersnatch being kind of next level technology for Netflix at the time. And, playing around with interactive television formats. That could be an interesting future episode concept. I don't know. I don't know if you have to come up with another like story arc that would make sense for something like that to happen. Yeah. Where like the episode changes itself as you watch it. So if you go back and watch it again, it's different. But yeah, I mean, it would be definitely a good one to do it with, where you go back to the email scene and then she types it out a different way. Yeah, I mean it's very interesting episode. I think like obviously the ending was very hokey for me. Like for me, it kind of felt like it was being set up that she was gonna maybe suicide by cop or something, just to like kind of end it there. And that it ended up playing out the opposite way. But I think overall, it's very much like the main themes are like, as Maggie kind of pointed out, like social, like the kind of perception becoming reality through like social pressure, and then also like just like gaslighting and other kinds of manipulation tactics that both get applied in terms of we are aware that like the bullies in high school kind of accidentally created this reality for Verity where they spread a rumor about her that everyone just ended up believing because it fit a narrative that they were trying to craft, and then that kind of gets flipped on its head with Verity, basically like driving the bullies to suicide by creating these scenarios where they feel like they're being gaslit by everyone around them, and then just like revenge as like a narrative story element, which is something that Black Mirror has done a number of revenge-based stories in the past. Usually, it's people who are like, it's kind of the similar vibe where like somebody who you're like, yeah, this person deserves this revenge being done against them, but then like the revenge being done against them is like not. It's like way above and beyond, like way above board compared to like what they had done to begin with. Like even something like a White Bear, where like what the main character woman in White Bear had done was horrific, and then we found out at the end, like still the experience she's going through in that episode is probably worse than the crime that she had committed to begin with, and on top of that, in an episode she's not even aware of the crime that she'd committed because her memory had been like altered. So like it's almost like examining the human need for retribution and revenge in a way that's like sadistic and just as evil as the people you're trying to enact the revenge on to begin with.
Yeah. I think,
Yeah.
looking at this episode as a whole too, with the idea of, the need for revenge and the sadistic nature of people. I think this episode as a whole, though, is just a great example of gaslighting. I'm thinking back to the episode, the title cards for the day by day. Such a crazy, impactful, like, slam in your face of what it is, this progression of time. And I remember thinking, like, after I was like, what was the point? Right. I was like, okay, cool. Like, a week happens, like, this all happens in a few days, like, that's rough. Like, go on. But there's so much in your face stuff. This is not a subtle episode, right? Her playing with her pendant. It's very obvious from the get-go that something's up with that pendant. It's very obvious that Maria and Verity are both, like, not nice people. It's very obvious that, you know, things like the almond milk and how that was displayed so many times. Stuff is going to happen about this. And in your mind, or at least in my mind, I came up with, like, this is what's going to happen. This is how this episode is going to play out. I convinced myself of, like, this is what it's going to be. And it's not really necessarily like how it played out, And I think, part of this episode and that, our perception of reality and how, like, we think things and that can change and how we think about stuff. This episode really did a good job of doing that. Even the hokiness at the end, like, it was hokey at the end, her choosing to be Empress of the Universe. You're like, oh, okay, like, whatever. That plays into what what we're expecting of these characters, we're expecting this episode, and maybe that's not exactly how it played out. I think that's why this episode in general is, like, very interesting, because there's a lot of different things that's trying to convince you of one thing, and it's not necessarily, like, what it is, or, like, you assume stuff and it's not how it is. I think this episode did a good job with that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like too, being Empress of the Universe or Emperor of the Universe, whatever, that'd be a lot of pressure to come into without knowing the, like, political situation of the universe. Thrust into stuff and be like, okay, so what does that mean? Are there aliens? Did humans colonize planets? Is it like a Dune situation where, like, it's just humans, but there's various, political factions? Like, I don't know if I'd be prepared to just take that on out of the blue, without understanding how everything came to be.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that does kind of play in, though, as Maggie said, like, the as evidence of kind of Maria's control freak nature, and, like, as even her boyfriend said, that you need to be on top of everything, like, you need to always be in charge, you need to always be in control of every situation. And this is our boyfriend saying this, like, like,
Yeah, right.
this isn't like some, like, subordinate of hers at work or something, right? Like, like, he would know best, right? And so I think that is,
That's why at the end, I didn't want Maria to win. I don't want her to die. But, like, everything this episode is telling us, Maria is not great either. Even without the final reveal that she started this rumor, she's a control freak, and there's all these other things. And so, you know, and in the end, that's what happened. This
Mhm.
awful person became in charge and immediately just chose to change to can be in charge of everything. This is not when you referred to this as, like, a happy ending. I was like,
Yeah.
I don't think so at all.
Obviously, by Black Mirror standards, to be fair, compared to, like, which is what I was comparing the episode to a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, I also don't think that USS Callister had a happy ending, but I know a lot of people will consider it to have had a happy-ish ending for Black Mirror standards.
As happy as it could get.
Yeah. Like, I would say, like, as far as, like, happy endings go on Black Mirror, it's like well, like, Hang the DJ and, like, maybe San Junipero, if you, like, really stretch your imagination for what a happy ending would be. But, like, even in San Junipero, they're still like dying, like,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. when the happiest ending you can come up with is like, yeah, they died, but like they were happy when they died, you know? Like that's kind of what we're working with Black Mirror in terms of like happy. I guess a true happy ending for this episode would have been like the machine getting destroyed, right? Like that's probably as good as we would have gotten.
Or her creating a universe where she never spread the rumor.
Yeah, all right.
In the first place. And like
Maria could have done that.
Have this
Maria
trauma.
could have.
Yeah, she could have.
But she didn't.
Yeah, she could have saved her friend. She could have had everything go back to normal. So both of them didn't do that, you know. Instead, they just went for power.
Yep. Power
it reminds me a lot of an episode of Buffy called The Wish, where there's like a similar setup and a similar pendant that is the focus, where somebody wishes that one character had never come to the town that they live in, and then you get to see the ripple effects of if that character never came there, what would have happened. So if you're that sounds interesting, or if you're a Buffy fan, check out the Sunnydale review. We covered that episode on there, but it gave me a lot of vibes of that episode. It ultimately, like, spoilers for like a 20-year-old show, skip ahead if you don't want to be spoiled, but they destroy the pendant and just go back to zero, from when it happened. So very different ending than this, where the person became the Empress of the Universe.
Well, I think like, the I think the takeaway from this should be like, even if you have trauma, like the solution to your trauma isn't to become a demigod.
Yeah.
Like,
There are.
You can say that to like many of the olive
I know therapy's expensive, right?
Yeah.
Did any of you look up or know the meaning of bête noire?
Yes. So
I had to look that up. I had to look that up for myself. And essentially, it's a French term. Literal translation meaning black sheep, but it's more of an concept, an idea of what's avoided by society. And I guess like my thought is, who is the black sheep of this episode? Because I think you're set up to believe it's Verity. She's that weird girl at school. She always spends her whole time in the lab. She's the milkmaid. But the argument can be made for Maria as well. She is also the black sheep. She's avoided by a coworker. I don't think we see any close friends of hers, or she has friends and she is friendlies with others. And I guess she does have her husband, but I think the argument could be made that, Maria as the bully can also be the black sheep of reality. But I didn't know if anyone else had thoughts about that.
She certainly becomes the black sheep through the,
I think she was always the black sheep.
Yeah, but she always.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think like it's again like reality and perception, right? Where like the entire idea of the episode is basically Verity has this traumatic experience, and her way of enacting revenge on the people who put her through that experience is to basically replicate that trauma onto them like 100-fold. And so I think that like that's kind of what like we are intended to be like. This is what happens when the person who is made the bête noire is given the power to like do that to the people who put them in that position to begin with. And it's like, it's not, like the issue in that scenario isn't that one person has power and the other doesn't. It's that like that the thing that's done with that disparity of social power or whatever is like deliberately harmful. And just like reversing the roles doesn't suddenly make it good or just like, and maybe it's like kind of kitschy, but like I think like the moral of the story is like, that the solution to horrible things happening is just like kindness, I guess, like, not
mind your own business.
Not becoming the thing that like, destroyed you to begin with, like not being corrupted by the power that had oppressed you. I don't know.
And Black Mirror loves that, right? There
Oh,
are
100%. Yeah.
so many episodes
Yeah.
where the main character ends in the same position that they were arguably trying to go against from throughout the whole episode in a different, unique way. This is not a new thing for Black Mirror. Um, I it was maybe a different way of going about it as they always try to do, but that's definitely something Black Mirror loves to do. And like your ending is not necessarily what you want and or it's not as great as you think it's gonna be.
Yeah. I mean, like, I again, back to like the original USS Callister with like, I believe Robert was the name of the character, the like CTO of the company who is like stealing people's DNA to create these, artificial intelligence simulations where he can be like a god and, control the people that he like has personal issues with in real life. And it's just like that's not a healthy solution to to being social ostracization or the trauma that comes from any sort of like bullying or anything like that. Like it's just it's becoming worse than the bullies that put you in the situation to begin with.
Right. Yeah.
I guess the
And I
real
liked it. I
question.
thought it was different.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No, I just was
Uh,
saying, I just thought it was like a different style of episode that I didn't necessarily expect from Black Mirror, but I really dug it.
Mhm.
mhm. I was gonna say, I guess the real question is if you had the pendant,
Mhm.
what would you be your first reality that you would establish?
Hmm.
You can go first, Brian.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, like probably cure cancer. That's like the slam
Mhm.
dunk, like easy one. I wouldn't even need credit for it. Just like get rid of it. That'd be
Yeah, just
great.
get rid of,
But then, yeah, just make like, oh, I invented something that gives me money so I can just do whatever I want all the time would be the next one.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I need to be the emperor of the universe. That seems like a lot of work. I just want to be able to do whatever I want all the
Mhm.
time.
Well,
What
I
about
mean,
you?
I don't know. I don't know if I would want to have this pendant.
No,
Uh,
definitely wouldn't
I
be
feel
a
like it's kind
thing.
of like an absolute power corrupts absolutely kind of deal,
Mm,
where like maybe I guess that's like where you can have like a slightly more empathy with kind of where Verity ends up, where like this is just like the natural conclusion of like the human psyche, where like anybody would kind of end up in the same position she ends up in, where like she's kind of almost kind of disconnected from reality because of the device, where like she doesn't really see the current reality she's experiencing as truly real because she's like self-aware enough to know that like this like every possible bad or good thing is happening simultaneously in parallel anyways. So
mhm.
like that's almost like kind of mentally freeing in a way that makes you not really kind of experience empathy the same way, I would say. So I probably would just destroy the device the second I got it. I would not feel comfortable having something like this.
Yeah.
But who knows? I mean, I'm human too, so I say that without having the pendant in my hand.
Yeah.
You
What
know,
about you,
you
Maggie?
saying that reminds me of Joy's character in Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Mhm.
This realization, being able to see every infinite reality and scenario and how that plays out and how psychologically that changes you. And the parallel, yeah, I could see that or Verity being that similar idea of when you have everything at your fingertip, you have nothing,
Mhm.
and a very lonely existence, I'm sure, for Verity.
Well, yeah,
But
I mean, she essentially like transcended. She is like
yeah.
a god amongst men. Like, how could she possibly have empathy for anyone if like everything, like Ben said, is not set in stone and anything can change at her whims? Like, yeah, she's just not even a human anymore.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
don't I don't know what reality I would have. I think I would be afraid too of having too much power. But again, I say this, and I'm also
Mhm.
like, maybe I'll just have reality with there's always more Black Mirror episodes. Every week, another Black Mirror episode.
Would keep us going for this podcast. That'd be smart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh man. Well, anything else for this episode that you guys wanted to cover?
No, it's interesting. It's like very, like you said, very unique. And like definitely for me, way more about like the human experiences and like the kind of relationship and the like kind of way like power corrupts and like the way that like kind of you know perception becomes reality and less about the like specific technology, which I definitely you know was making kind of faces at throughout the episode, or like I guess towards the end when it was more revealed. Yeah.
Yeah, I said it earlier again, how rumors can take on a voice of its own when not in checked. This episode did a great job with that. And the gaslighting we do upon ourselves, especially if you're involved with a rumor creation. I think that's something we didn't explore too. Maria so thoroughly was able to gaslight herself in the beginning of like, that wasn't me. That was this Natalie fellow who started this rumor. And, I wasn't a part of this. I always liked you, Verito. I had no problems with you. And then that reveal at the end that was Maria all along.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, this episode did a great job of portraying that and what happens in the schoolyard when we're all kids and how that can really affect you for your life. So
Yeah. It is interesting that I guess Maria is like a stickler for like truth and details, except the ones that make her look bad.
yeah. And she's not good at it too, right? She's not good at it. She has to be in control. She has to uh, you know, everything has to go her way, and her way is not necessarily the best way. Again,
Right.
she's not necessarily great at her job per se. The original focus group didn't like her stuff. I would
Right.
argue her boyfriend husband didn't like her stuff.
Well, until Verity changed it to a reality where everybody did like her food.
Right. So
There's always
yeah,
a reality out there where she is always right, right?
I guess
So
that's true. There is always that.
yeah, yeah, no, I agree. And
I
it's
really, I
interesting-
really like this episode.
yeah, it also is interesting to talk about like from the perspective of like what about this episode really did matter if nothing actually mattered in terms of like the story could be anything and like the details could change to fit any way which way, and I think at that point it is about the individual people and their relationships that is the interesting part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, anything else from you, Brian?
No, like I said, enjoyed it. I think people who are very into the Mandela effect will be very happy that their hyperfixation has been portrayed in media in a mainstream way. Are there any Mandela effects that you guys have ever been like, wait a second? Cause the only one for me is the Fruit of the Loom. I really did think there was a cornucopia in the logo for Fruit of the Loom, but there's
Mhm.
not. There never has been. And that's the one that's like, but I swear, because I thought that's what a loom was a
Mhm.
cornucopia. And then someone's like, no, it's a
Mhm.
cornucopia. Like, why is it called that then? It's because they make the clothes from a loom. But no, I was wrong.
I'm trying to think. I think for like the Shazam Kazam one, maybe
Right.
like yeah. Like that wasn't like that really like bugs me, but that was more of like, oh yeah, like I guess I probably believed that, and then like I just didn't have the details right in my head.
Yeah.
There was none that made me feel like I was being gaslit by reality.
Mhm.
I think the Bearstein Bear one, because that was the one that kind of first introduced me into that
Yeah.
effect. Um, I read Berenstain Bear as a child, and
Mhm.
I definitely went back and looked at my old picture books and
They said
realized,
Berenstain, yeah.
oh yeah, oh
Yeah.
no.
The fact that it's named after Nelson Mandela is very funny to me because it's like, but why would you know who Nelson Mandela was if he wasn't the president of
No,
South
no,
Africa? You know,
that was the Mandela effect comes from people thinking that he died in the 90s in jail.
right before he became president. But it's like, why would you
Oh,
just know this one civil rights person in South
oh
Africa?
yeah, that makes sense. I
You
see.
know, if he never became the president of South
Yeah,
Africa,
Um,
like, why would you even know him? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So that's the one where it's like, okay, I don't know. This is a faulty foundation for all
Yeah, that
this to
makes
be built
sense.
upon.
But I think that's just like what Western white people who don't know the history of South Africa very well.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
like,
Because of course, like I thought that I was like, wow, that's so dumb. And then people are like, Fruit of the Loom never had a cornucopia. I was like, wait,
Mhm.
maybe it's not.
But
So
yeah, no. That is kind of funny because I agree. I think like the the main Mandela effect about Mandela was definitely like the most ridiculous to me conceptually.
yeah, right.
The other ones were like, oh, this was like spelled differently, or like the Luke, I am your father, I am your father kind of deal, right? Like that, that makes more sense because that's just like
Mhm.
things changing over time, or like enough people saying the wrong thing kind of
That
forms like
just
a
became the thing.
yeah.
Yeah, the Luke, I'm your father one definitely, I think, is just other things saying it, like movies saying that, and then
Yeah.
that being like, oh yeah, that must be what the original line was.
Yep.
Then you
yep.
watch it and you're like, no, I guess not. Yeah, fun
No.
stuff. But yeah, are we ready? Should I do the rigmarole of all the
Yes. Yeah.
different things? All right. We Get Everything's the main channel. Video essays about video games pretty much is what's on the channel right now. Those Fake Nerds is nerd and pop culture news, Wicked Sports, sports news, and this channel is Better Radio. Check it out for all of our podcasts. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.